The fluorescent lights flickered twice before the gunshots erupted through the emergency room corridor. Sarah Mitchell dropped to her knees beside bed 7, where a man with bandaged ribs lay sedated from a motorcycle accident earlier that evening. She didn't think. She didn't calculate the odds. She threw her body over his, pressing her chest against his wounds, shielding his head with her arms, as glass shattered somewhere behind her. The man's eyes snapped open, not with the confusion of a patient waking from sedation, but with the cold, calculating awareness of someone who had survived situations far worse than this. In that fraction of a second, Sarah saw something in those gray eyes that made her blood run cold. Recognition, assessment, and something else she couldn't name. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that the stranger beneath her had spent 23 years extracting hostages from war zones, neutralizing threats in 12 different countries, and earning medals that would never appear in any public record. Colonel Marcus Webb had been trained to protect others. No one had ever protected him. And in 17 seconds, everything about this night would change in ways neither of them could have predicted. Before we dive deeper into what happened next in that hospital corridor, I want to ask you something. Drop a comment right now telling me which city you're watching from. I read every single comment, and I love connecting with people from all over the world who share these incredible stories with me. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this unfolds. Now, let me take you back to where this story really began. 6 hours before those gunshots changed everything. Sarah Mitchell wasn't supposed to be working that night. She had traded shifts with another nurse, covering for a colleague whose daughter had a dance recital. It was a small kindness, the kind Sarah offered without thinking twice. She had no idea that this simple act of generosity would place her directly in the path of a man whose classified missions had shaped the outcomes of conflicts most Americans would never hear about. And she certainly didn't know that by sunrise, her name would be spoken in rooms where decisions about national security were made. Sarah had been a night nurse at Memorial General for 11 years. She knew the rhythm of the emergency room the way a captain knows the sea, the surges and lulls, the quiet hours between 2 and 4 a.m. when the world seemed to hold its breath. She had seen knife wounds and overdoses, car accident victims and domestic violence survivors. Nothing surprised her anymore. Or so she thought. The man in bed 7 had arrived around 9 p.m., brought in by ambulance after his motorcycle collided with a deer on Route 47. The paramedics reported he had been conscious during transport, calm despite 3 fractured ribs and a laceration across his left shoulder that required 18 stitches. What struck Sarah as unusual was his silence. Most patients talked, complained about pain, asked questions, made nervous jokes. This man said nothing. He watched. His eyes tracked every movement in the room, cataloging exits, counting personnel, noting the positions of medical equipment. When she administered the sedative, he thanked her with a single nod. No name beyond what his license provided. No emergency contact. No insurance information beyond a government card she didn't recognize. Sarah had flagged him as a potential veteran. The quiet ones often were, and made a mental note to check on him more frequently. She had no way of knowing that the card she didn't recognize was issued to fewer than 200 people in the entire country, or that 3 of those people were currently trying to locate him. The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m. when the first unusual thing happened. A man in a dark coat walked past the nurse's station 3 times without stopping. Sarah noticed because noticing was her job. The man in the dark coat had a face that Sarah would later struggle to describe to investigators. Average height, average build, brown hair or maybe dark blonde, the kind of face that slides out of memory like water through fingers. He passed the nurse's station a 4th time, and this time Sarah stood. Something felt wrong, a frequency of unease, humming just below the surface of her awareness. She had learned to trust that feeling. 11 years in emergency medicine had taught her that instinct often knew things before the conscious mind caught up. She walked toward bed 7, not because she had a reason, but because her feet carried her there. The man she knew only as Marcus Webb was awake. The sedative should have kept him under for another 2 hours at least. But his eyes were open, fixed on the corridor behind her. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "How many exits on this floor?" Sarah blinked. "Excuse me? Exits. How many?" "3. The main entrance, the ambulance bay, and a staff door near radiology. Why?" He didn't answer. Instead, he began pulling the IV from his arm with practiced efficiency, no wasted motion, no hesitation. Sarah reached for his wrist. "Sir, you can't. Get down." The words weren't a request. They carried the weight of absolute authority, the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Sarah opened her mouth to protest. That's when the lights went out. Emergency generators kicked in 3 seconds later, bathing the corridor in dim red light. And in that red light, Sarah saw the man in the dark coat standing at the end of the hallway. He was no longer alone. 2 others flanked him, and all 3 were holding weapons she had only seen in movies. Her training told her to run. Her instincts told her to hide. But Sarah did neither. She turned back to the patient in bed 7, to Marcus Webb, and saw that he had already swung his legs over the side of the bed. Blood seeped through his bandages from the movement, but his face showed no pain. Only calculation. Only readiness. "There's a supply closet," Sarah whispered, her voice steadier than she felt. "Behind the curtain, second door on the left." He shook his head. "They'll check supply closets first. We need to move toward the noise, not away from it." "That's insane. That's survival." A scream echoed from somewhere near the main entrance. Then another. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as the reality crystallized. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't a random act of violence. These men had come here looking for something. Or someone. Marcus Webb stood, swaying slightly before steadying himself against the bed rail. In the red emergency lighting, his face looked carved from stone, all hard angles and shadow. Sarah should have left him. Every protocol, every training session, every rational thought told her to evacuate with the other staff, to get to safety, to let security handle whatever this was. But she looked at this man, injured, outnumbered, clearly the target, and something ancient and fierce rose up in her chest. She had become a nurse to help people, not just when it was easy, not just when it was safe. "Come with me," she said, grabbing his arm. "I know this hospital better than anyone alive." For the first time, something like surprise flickered across his features. "You should run." "Probably, but I'm not going to." She pulled him toward the curtain, toward the shadows, toward a chance she wasn't sure existed. Behind them, footsteps echoed closer. The supply closet Sarah bypassed led to a narrow maintenance corridor that most staff had forgotten existed. It had been sealed during renovations 3 years ago, but Sarah knew the lock was broken, had been broken since a plumber forced it open to access a pipe and never reported the damage. She guided Marcus through the darkness, feeling along the wall with her free hand while supporting his weight with the other. He moved with surprising fluidity for a man with 3 fractured ribs, but she could feel the tension in his muscles, the controlled breathing of someone managing significant pain through sheer willpower. "Who are they?" she whispered. "People who want me dead. Government? Criminals? Does it matter right now?" It didn't. Not really. What mattered was the door at the end of this corridor, and the parking structure beyond it, and the chance, however slim, of reaching help. What mattered was the sound of voices behind them, growing closer. The maintenance corridor ended at a heavy metal door. Sarah pressed against it, but it didn't budge. Rusted. Sealed by years of disuse. She felt her stomach drop. Marcus moved her aside, gently but firmly. In the darkness, she heard him take a breath, then throw his shoulder against the door with enough force that she felt the impact, through the floor. The door groaned, but held. He hit it again. This time, something cracked. Blood was soaking through his hospital gown now. She could smell the copper tang of it. One more impact, and the door burst open, spilling them into the cold night air of the parking structure, and directly into the path of a fourth man. He was bigger than the others, with a shaved head and a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. He raised his weapon with casual certainty. Sarah didn't think. Thinking would have meant hesitation, and hesitation would have meant death. She threw herself in front of Marcus Webb, this stranger, this injured man, this person she had known for less than 4 hours, and felt time slow to a crawl. The man with the scar hesitated, just for a heartbeat, just long enough. Marcus moved with a speed that defied his injuries, grabbing the man's weapon arm and twisting with brutal efficiency. The gun discharged into the ceiling. Concrete dust rained down as the two men struggled, and Sarah pressed herself against the wall, searching frantically for something, anything she could use. Her hand closed around a fire extinguisher mounted near the door. She didn't aim. She swung. The heavy metal cylinder connected with the scarred man's skull with a sound she would hear in her nightmares for years to come. He dropped. Marcus caught himself against a parked car, breathing hard, his face gray beneath the parking structure's fluorescent lights. Blood dripped from his reopened wounds onto the concrete. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "You saved my life," he finally said. "Twice." Sarah's hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was beginning to fade. "I'm a nurse. It's what I do." "No." He looked at her with those gray eyes, and she saw something new in them. Respect. Gratitude. And underneath it all, a profound weariness that had nothing to do with his physical injuries. "What you did, throwing yourself in front of a weapon, that's not nursing. That's something else entirely." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Blue and red lights began to paint the walls, but Sarah barely noticed because Marcus Webb was reaching into the pocket of his hospital gown, where no patient should have anything, and pulling out a small metal object. It was a coin. Bronze, worn smooth by years of handling. On one side, an eagle clutched arrows and olive branches. On the other, words Sarah couldn't read in the dim light. Marcus pressed it into her palm. "If you ever need anything," he said quietly, "show this to the right people and tell them Prometheus sent you." Prometheus. It's not my name, but it's the name that matters. The sirens were screaming now, and the parking structure flooded with light as police vehicles poured in from every entrance. Men in tactical gear surrounded them within seconds, weapons drawn, but not pointed at Sarah and Marcus, pointed outward, protective. An older man in a suit approached, his expression shifting from tension to relief when he saw Marcus standing. "Colonel Webb, we've been looking for you for 6 hours. Had a minor detour, Director." Marcus nodded toward Sarah. "This woman saved my life, multiple times. I want her protected and compensated. Full package." The director's eyes swept over Sarah, taking in her blood-stained scrubs, her disheveled hair, the fire extinguisher she still clutched like a weapon. Whatever he saw made him nod slowly. "Consider it done." Sarah opened her mouth to say she didn't need protection or compensation, that she had only done what anyone would do. But even as the thought formed, she knew it wasn't true. Most people would have run. Most people would have saved themselves. She had chosen differently, and that choice had consequences she was only beginning to understand. "What happens now?" she asked. Colonel Marcus Webb, decorated Special Forces commander, holder of classified medals, survivor of missions that would never appear in history, books, looked at her with something approaching a smile. 3 months later, Sarah Mitchell stood in a room she never knew existed, in a building with no address, accepting a medal that would never appear in any public record. Colonel Marcus Webb pinned it to her chest himself, his ribs fully healed, his gray eyes warm with an emotion that looked remarkably like pride. She had learned, in those 3 months, exactly who she had saved that night. She had learned about the 23 years of service, the impossible missions, the lives he had protected at the cost of his own peace. and she had learned that sometimes the universe places ordinary people in extraordinary moments, not by accident, but by design. Sarah Mitchell went back to nursing. She still works the night shift at Memorial General, but now sometimes she receives visitors with very specific questions, and when she does, she shows them a bronze coin and tells them Prometheus sent her. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that courage lives in ordinary hearts, then do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because stories like Sarah's deserve to be told, and you deserve to hear what comes next.